Welcome to the Read Aloud for June 11th. Here we go. Right in the middle. Let's see. We did not attempt to leave that night, but went together and looked at the metal grid Justin had discovered and made plans for exploring the air ducts. Jenner was astute at that sort of thing. He could foresee problems. With a vent like this leading to every room, he said, it will be easy to get lost. When we explore, we're going to need some way to find our way back here. Why should we come back? Someone asked. Because it may take more than one night to find the way out. If it does, whoever is doing the exploring must be back in his cage by morning. Otherwise, Dr. Schultz will find out. Jenner was right. It took us about a week. What we did, after some discussion, was to find some equipment. First, a large spool of thread in one of the cabinets, where some of us had seen Julia place it one day. Second, a screwdriver that was kept on a shelf near the electrical equipment. Because, as Jenner pointed out, there would probably be a screen over the end of the air shaft to keep out debris, and we might have to pry it loose. What we really needed was a light, for the ducts at night were completely dark. But there was none to be had, not even a box of matches. The thread and the screwdriver we hid in the duct, a few feet from the entrance. We could only hope they would not be missed, or that if they were, we wouldn't be suspected. Justin and two others were chosen as the exploration party. One of the others was Arthur, whom you've met. They had a terrible time at first. Here was a maze to end all mazes, and in the dark they quickly lost their sense of direction. Still, they kept at it night after night, exploring the network of shafts that laced like a cubical spider web through the walls and ceilings of the building. They would tie the end of their thread to the grid on our laboratory and unroll it from the spool as they went. Time and time again, they reached the end of the thread and had to come back. It just isn't long enough, Justin complained. Every time I come to the end, I think if I could just go 10 feet farther. And finally, that's what he did. On the seventh night, just as the thread ran out, he and the other two reached the shaft that was wider than any they had found before, and it seemed, as they walked along it, to be slanting gently upward, but the spool was empty. You wait here, Justin said to the others. I'm going a little way farther. Hang on to the spool, and if I call back. They had tied the end of the thread around the spool so they would not lose it in the dark. Justin had a hunch. The air coming through the shaft had a fresher smell than where they were, and it seemed to be blowing harder than in the other shafts. Up ahead, he thought he could hear the whir of a machine running quietly, and there was a faint vibration in the metal under his feet. He went on. The shaft turned upward at a sharp angle, and then straight ahead he saw it, a patch of lighter colored darkness than the pitch black around him. In the middle of it, 3 stars twinkling. It was the open sky. Across the opening there was, as Jenner had predicted, a coarse screen of heavy wire. He ran toward it and for a few seconds longer, and then stopped. The sound of the machine had grown suddenly louder, changing from a whir to a roar. It had obviously shifted speeds. An automatic switch somewhere in the building had turned it from low to high, and the air blowing past Justin came on so hard it made him gasp. He braced his feet against the metal and held on. In a minute, as suddenly as it had roared, the machine returned to a whisper. He looked around and realized he was lucky to have stopped. By the dim light from the sky, he could see that he had reached a point where perhaps 24 air shafts came together like branches in a tree trunk. If he had gone a few steps further, he would have never been able to distinguish which shaft was his. He turned in his tracks, and in a few minutes he rejoined his friends. We had a meeting that night, and Justin told all of us what he had found. He had left the thread anchored to the screwdriver to guide us out somewhere. Some were for leaving immediately, but it was late, and Jenner and I argued against it. We did not know how long it would take us to break through the screen at the end. If it should take more than an hour or two, daylight would be upon us. We would then be unable to risk returning to the laboratory and would have to spend the day in the shaft or try to get away by broad daylight. Dr. Schultz might even figure out the way we had gone and trap us in the air shaft. Finally, reluctantly, everyone agreed to spend one more day in the laboratory and leave early the next night. But it was a hard decision, with freedom so near and everyone thinking as I did. Suppose Dr. Schultz grew suspicious and put locks on our cages. Suppose someone found our thread and pulled it out. This was unlikely. The near end, tied to the spool, was 6 feet up the shaft, well hidden. Just the same, we were uneasy. Then, just as we were ending our meeting, a new complication arose. We had been standing in a rough circle in the floor of the laboratory, just outside the 2 screen doors that enclosed the mice's cage. Now, from inside the cabinet came a voice. Nicodemus. It was clear but plaintive call, the voice of a mouse. We'd almost forgotten the mice were there, and I was startled to hear that one of them knew my name, and we all grew quiet. Who's calling me? My name is Jonathan, said the voice. We have been listening to your talk about going out. We would like to go too, but we cannot open our cages. As you can imagine, this caused a certain consternation coming at the last minute. None of us knew much about the mice, except that we had heard Dr. Schultz dictate into his tape recorder. From that, we had learned only that they had been getting the same injections we were getting, and that the treatment had worked about as well on them as on us. They were a sort of side experiment without a control group. Justin was studying the cabinet. Why not, he said. If we can get the doors open, someone muttered, they'll slow us down. No, said the mouse Jonathan, we will not. Only open our cage when you go, and we will make our own way. We won't even stay with you if you prefer. How many are you, I asked. Only 8, and the cabinet doors are easy to open. There's just a simple hook halfway up. But Justin and Arthur had already figured that out. They climbed up the screen, unhooked the hook, and the door swung open. The cage is open the same way as yours, said another mouse, but we can't reach far enough to unlatch them. All right, I said. Tomorrow night, as soon as Dr. Schultz and the others leave, we'll open your cages, and you can follow the thread with us to get out. After that, you're on your own. Agreed, said Jonathan, and thank you. And now, I said, we should all get back to the cages. Justin, please hook the doors again. I had latched myself in my cage and was getting ready for sleep when I heard a scratching noise on the door. It was Jenner climbing down from above. Nicodemus, he said, can I come in? Of course, but it's getting towards morning. Yeah, I won't stay long. He unlatched the door and entered. There's something we've got to decide. I know, I said. I've been thinking about it too. When we get out, where are we going to go? I could not see Jenner's face in the dark of the cage, but I knew from his voice that he was worrying. I said, at first I thought home, of course, but then when I began remembering, I realized that won't work. We could find the way, I suppose, now that we can read, but if we did, what then? We couldn't find anyone we knew. And yet, said Jenner, you know that's not the real point. No, the real point is this. We don't know where to go because we don't know what we are. Do you want to go back to living in a sewer pipe and eating other people's garbage? Because that's what rats do. The fact is, we aren't rats anymore. We're something Dr. Schultz has made us, something new. Dr. Schultz says our intelligence has increased more than 1,000%. I suspect he's underestimated. I think we're probably as intelligent as he is, maybe more. We can read and with a little practice, we'll be able to write too, and I mean to do both. I think we can learn to do anything we want, but where do we do it? Where does a group of civilized rats fit in? I don't know, I said. We're going to have to find out. It won't be easy. But even so, the first step must be to get out of here. We're lucky to have a chance, but it won't last. We're a jump ahead of Dr. Schultz. If he knew what we know, he wouldn't leave us alone in here at night. And he's sure to find out soon. Another thing to worry about, Jenner said. If we do get away, when he finds we're gone, won't he figure out how we did it? And won't he realize that we must have learned to read? Probably. And then what? What will happen when he announces that there's a group of civilized rats roaming loose? Rats that can read and think and figure things out. I said, let's wait until we're free before we worry about that. But Jenner was right. It was a thing to worry about, and maybe it still is. The next day was terrible. I kept expecting to hear Dr. Schultz say, "Who took my screwdriver?" And then to hear Julia, "My thread is missing too." That could have happened and set them to thinking, but it didn't. And that night, an hour after Julia, George, and Dr. Schultz left the laboratory, we were out of our cages and gathered, the whole group of us, before the mouse cabinet. Justin opened its doors, unlatched their cages, and the mice came out. They looked very small and frightened, but one stood bravely forward. "You are Nicodemus," he said to me. "I am Jonathan. Thank you for taking us with you." "We're not out yet," I said, "but you're welcome." We had no time for chatting. The light coming in the windows was turning gray. In less than an hour it would be dark and we would need light to figure out how to open the screen door at the end of the shaft. We went to the opening in the baseboard. "Justin," I said, "take the lead. Roll up the thread as you go and bring it up the rear. No noise. There's sure to be somebody awake somewhere in the building and we don't want them to hear us." I did not want to leave the thread where it might be found. The more I thought about it, the more I felt sure Dr. Schultz would try to track us down for quite a few reasons. Justin lifted the grid, pushed open the sliding panel, and one by one we went through. As I watched the others go ahead of me, I noticed for the first time that one of the mice was white. And then I went myself, closing the grid behind me and pushing the panel half shut, its normal position. With Justin leading the way, we moved through the dark passage quickly and easily. If in only 15 or 20 minutes we had reached the end of the thread, then, as Justin has told us it would, the shaft widened and we could hear the whir of the machine ahead, and almost immediately we saw a square of gray daylight. We had reached the end of the shaft, and there a terrible thing happened. Justin, you will recall, had told us that the machine, the pump that pulled air through the shaft, had switched from low speed to high when we had first explored through there, so we were forewarned. The trouble was, the forewarning was no use at all, not so far as the mice were concerned. All right, we'll read more tomorrow.